Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Michelle Miller. I'm the portfolio lead for the community care and dementia portfolio at Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and delighted to welcome colleagues to the webinar today on the use of psychological models to understand well-being and team function. A really critical topic, I think, to all of us right now. So today we're joined by Dr. Sue Ross and Dr. Phil Smith from NHS Lanarkshire. So thank you for joining us today. Before I go on to housekeeping, I'll just give a wee introduction to Sue and Phil, for those who haven't met Sue and Phil before. So Sue is a consultant clinical psychologist and head of specialties for psychological therapies for older people, psychological services staff support team, and neuropsychology in NHS Lanarkshire. That's quite a title, Sue. Hope you don't have to say that too often. And Sue has worked with older people for 12 years and set up Lanarkshire's staff support team in 2021. Sue has worked closely with the health and social care workforce over the past few years to bring a trauma-informed understanding of the strains staff have experienced and developed an intervention model of recovery. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that today. Phil, Dr. Phil Smith is a consultant clinical psychologist in psychological therapies for older people in NHS Lanarkshire. Phil has worked with older people over the past 7 years across community, inpatient and care home settings, and Phil brings a psychological perspective to working with complex systems following his close work with key stakeholders in local care home sector, particularly across the pandemic. So we'll hear a bit more about all of that today. So before we pass over to Sue and Phil, just some basic housekeeping, which I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with working with teams right now. So your camera and microphones should have been set to off because we've got a huge number of participants today. So we've automatically done that, but if you're still seeing your camera and microphone on, then if you could please turn them off, and it just means we don't have any background and interference as we're presenting today. We are going to have a Q&A session after the speakers, but we are aware that there may be terms or information that comes up in the session that people maybe need a wee bit of clarity or more explanation on. So please feel free to put any comments in the chat box where you're unclear about something, or if you've just got a general question that you would like us to pick up later, then just pop them in the chat box. My colleagues, Julie and Marie, are keeping an eye on the chat box, as well as Phil and Sue, and we will have an opportunity at the end of the presentations just to go through any questions. Lastly, the webinar is being recorded, and by taking part, you do consent to the recording. The recording will be available on our website after the session, but the link will also be circulated to everyone today. And just to reassure you that anything you put in the chat box will not be part of the recording. So it will just be the presentation and the discussion which will appear in the recording. So that's all the housekeeping out the way. So I'd like to hand over now to Sue and Phil to take forward this session for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
Lovely to be with you all today, although a bit daunting having such a large audience, especially when my internet crashed as I tried to join. So hopefully we'll have no more tech problems, and I will calm in the next 5 minutes as we make a start. So our agenda for today, we've just got on a slide there. Michelle has introduced myself and Phil already. Really excited to be with you today, and time is very precious for us all. So we really hope that we can make the most of our time together today and give you some food for thought and some ideas on such an important topic, especially at the sort of times we're all facing. So the rough schedule is that I'll talk through some background information and introduce the model that we're drawing very heavily on in Lanarkshire to start with. We have a little pause for some reflection ourselves, and then a short comfort break. And then we're going to move on with some examples and more about sort of how we actually do this, and our experiences, with a chance for questions at the end. So we've already introduced ourselves, thank you. We are going to start with a poll that will appear on the main screen, and we'd ask you to type your answer into the poll and that pops up on your screen and not into the chat box. And it's just a check-in with everyone to hear how you're feeling today as we start the event. Oops, gone too far, sorry. Okay, so completely anonymous. For anyone not familiar with these word clouds, the bigger the word means the more people who've entered that word. Okay, I think that's most people have popped a word in. Thank you. Given that there's 140 people here and 124 responses, we don't have a huge range of words, which is really, really interesting in itself. And tired is definitely the one that's coming up the most often. We've got a bit of frazzled and weary in there, but also some curiosity and excitedness and so on, about optimistic. So lovely. Thank you very much for doing that. We'll check in with you again later. I think it's really important that when we are embarking on an hour and a half like this, that we ease into it and a check-in. It both helps us connect with who else is on this call, but also for you to just try to make that transition from what you were doing first thing this morning into a slightly more reflective space. It's quite a helpful thing for us to do. Okay, I will close that. So today, what's today all about? It really, we're trying to give a bit of space for you as people in your roles, and I appreciate there's a whole variety of roles here today, to have a chance to pause, to check in with yourselves. What we've just done is the first step of that, and to take stock and reflect. And we really hope that for you as individuals, it will be a nourishing and inspiring webinar for you. And the start of it is very much about the feeling stuff, the how we are as people, and looking at ourselves and our colleagues that we work with. Towards the end, then we will think a little bit more about the doing stuff and what we do with this understanding, and so on. But we'll begin with focusing on the human factors around this topic. So early on in the pandemic, I think most of us will remember very clearly that there was a lot of fear about how on earth we were going to support our workforce during such unprecedented times, that phrase that we heard so often. And initially there was a national agreement and focus on the supports being based on psychological first aid. Really looking to support basic needs, ensuring that our staff had enough access to basic sustenance, food and drink during their shifts, and rest areas, and lots of places set up, wobble rooms, staff care areas, rest areas to give staff space to take time out if they were able to on their shift. And there were often peer supporters or wellbeing supporters that were redeployed from other sectors of the workforce, or identified within care homes and so on to try to provide a listening ear and psychological first aid, immediate response to human distress for their colleagues. Phone lines were set up, lots of options became available. And at the time, I think there was a really reasonable response. I think we should be very proud of what we did to redeploy staff to these roles and to try and get guidance and training available for staff. But over time, it really isn't enough. And our staff need much, much more in terms of support for their well-being. In early 2021, there was some money made available from the Scottish Government nationally to provide high-intensity psychology services for one-to-one assessment and treatment for the health and social care workforce. And this was a really welcome addition to what was available for staff, particularly given the levels of trauma, psychological trauma that the workforce was facing. Within Lanarkshire, when we launched that service in early 21, our biggest reason for referral was people asking the question, am I going crazy? It wasn't symptoms being reported, it was that fear. They've never felt like this before. What is going on with me? Closely followed by burnout. Anxiety, depression, sleep problems were all reasons for referral as well. But the most consistent statement we heard was people just not understanding what was happening to their mental health and how they were feeling, and desperately looking for some explanation and understanding and advice on how to get through that. That was a couple of years ago now. And at that time, we in Lanarkshire slightly adapted the model that was used nationally, really focusing on, we've got this sort of psych first aid that I just mentioned really would come into the tier 1 supports on this slide. And we had tier 2 supports with care for staff that was a little bit higher intensity. And tier 3 would be in that as well. And then the new funded services like the psychology services were these purple and indigo bits at the very top when staff were over the threshold of needing wellbeing support and needed some mental health treatment, assessment and treatment. But we've always been very, very aware of the need for the prevention at the bottom, thinking about our workforce having the conditions that they need to have a chance of being okay and being well. Yes, Sharon, the slides will be shared afterwards. So the sort of foundation of this is very, very important for all of us to think about. And early on in the pandemic, I don't think anyone had capacity to really focus in on that and redesign things. And that's what we've been trying to do over the last few years. Very importantly on this is making sure that all of the work we're doing is trauma informed. I think many of you will be familiar with the National Trauma Training Programme and the different training resources that are available within that, and just how important it is to look at staff wellbeing and having trauma informed services for our staff, both for the day-to-day work, but also for supports when difficult things happen. But what I want to do for the first part of this webinar is to just revisit trauma. For many of you, this will be a refresher and you will know about it. For some of you, it might be new information. But just stripping this back, when we're talking about psychological trauma, it's talked about a lot at the moment. What do we actually mean? And why are we in Lanarkshire drawing on this so heavily as a psychological theory and a model that is guiding us through our journey with staff wellbeing? So I'm hoping that technology is going to be in my favour, and Marina has done a great job, I think, setting this up. So I'm hoping that when I click play, we will be able to watch a brief video. It's just over 4 minutes that is going to talk us through the window of tolerance. A model, as I've said, many of you may be familiar with it, but we're just trying to strip that back. Even if you know it very, very well, let's strip it back to basics, and then we'll rebuild it, our understanding of it, thinking about the staff wellbeing context. So fingers crossed. Okay. Phil, you're the only one I can see. Can you give a nod if that's the YouTube stop playing?
Yeah, yep, that's it, stopped.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so probably not new information for some of you. It might be new for others. I find that video so lovely because it's talking about natural human stuff that is relevant for every single one of us. This isn't into the territory of mental illness. This isn't when we're struggling with our well-being. This is relevant for every single one of us every day of our lives. And while there's lots of academic and philosophical debate about just should we be using the word psychological trauma quite so readily when we're talking about these small t traumas and the everyday strains of life rather than the large t traumas, that's not a discussion for today, I don't think. But I think that video really captures just how much of an impact our day-to-day experiences have on how we feel and how we behave as a result. And really importantly, it hones in on protective coping. I think that's the biggest bit that I take from that is the impact of our daily life events have on us, and it leads us to cope in certain ways to protect ourselves, and that has to be at the foundation of our understanding of our workforce. So the model that was described in the video didn't use the colours, and I think it's really helpful for us to introduce the colours to it. So that hyperized going up out of your window of tolerance is what we would describe as red. The green is in that middle window of tolerance, and we talk about being in the blue when we are hypoarized in that bottom zone. So let's think about this in everyday real life and what happens. If we imagine we are driving home from work and we have a minor bump in the car, no injuries, nothing awful's happened, but we experience that moment of, oh my goodness, they're going to hit me, and that surge of adrenaline and fear, and we shoot up, our adrenaline goes up, we go out of that window, out of that green window, and it's really, really adaptive. It means we have that surge of adrenaline, fast reflexes, highly vigilant and alert for danger. We then have that quick check. Are we okay? Are we hurt? Is it safe to open the door to get out? That fear of what's the other driver going to be like? Are they going to scream at me? Are they going to be okay? And we have a really natural human stress response to a really stressful situation. And it's really adaptive. It keeps us on our toes, it keeps us vigilant for danger and making rapid decisions, not about the future, but in the very moment here and now to keep ourselves safe. If we then get in the car, we've exchanged details, cars are fine to drive, off we go, and we go home. And somebody's waiting for us and says, are you okay? You're a bit later than I expected. And we say, you'll never guess what just happened. And we tell the story. And we get somebody who helps us return to the green and helps us do that processing of making sense of what just happened. Not the in the red, rapid sort of thinking, like on your feet thinking, actually letting you reflect on it. For many people who've been in that situation, you maybe experience lots of what ifs and maybes. If I had maybe been 2 minutes later, or if, it might not have happened, or it might have been worse. What if the kids were in the car? And often people extend it to actually reflecting on their faith or their existential beliefs, their mortality, thinking about, thanking God, or if the other driver was at fault, might call on karma to get them back one day. All sorts of things happen when we have another human being that helps us regulate ourselves, get back in the green, and we process and make sense of it. But what happens if we get home and somebody greets us with a, "Where have you been? Why is dinner not ready?" and grumpiness, which gets our threat system going even more, and doesn't let us return to the green. A sense of injustice can come really, really strongly, which for some can lead to that sense of anger, and it can be a bit of red meeting red. And it can blow up into an argument. But for others, if this is a common thing, either at home or if work and there's a not supportive reception at work, if something like this happened, sometimes that would lead us to sort of hitting the blue, going into the blue, going a bit numb and detached because we just can't bear it. And that's the healthiest way that our body and our minds can protect ourselves, is by going a bit blue, detaching from it, and not fully experiencing and feeling all of the emotions that might be there. When somebody has that experience, and I'm painting a caricature here just for an example, this is not an absolute for everyone, but that's not getting back into the green after a bump in the car. That is the recipe then for some people might end up not having processed it, remaining in the red, easily going back up to the red when they get back in the car again. They might be highly anxious, a high energy sort of hypervigilance that then continues, and on alert, on threat, because they've not made sense of it. Or somebody else might go more towards a sort of chronic blue way of coping with that, with lots of avoidance, not getting in the car, not driving, having rules around what would be a safe journey. I can go in the car, but I can't go in a motorway where that happened, or I can't do that junction. So that's a really simple, and I can't emphasize enough how much this is a caricature of the types of what can happen when we don't have that opportunity to return to green after we've had a big dunt into the red. How important it is to have the conditions where we get safety after we are in the red, and how we can get trapped and stuck in some of these protective ways of coping, either with high energy sort of anxiety driven safety behaviors and checking and so on, or more avoidance based coping, red or blue. So that's what happens to us as people, and hopefully that's quite a relatable example there that I've given. What we find then is, if we think about our workforce and think about our staff as individual people, in normal times, pre-COVID, many of our working experiences had moments where we shot up into the red. There have always and always will be very stressful times and days and moments of our days when we work in health and social care. We are facing human suffering and human tragedy throughout our days, and things happen in the positions of responsibility that we have. And yes, Fiona, absolutely, the red is very very protective in some situations. Absolutely. But what we find, especially during the pandemic, is our staff lost the opportunity to return to the green. With teams being fragmented, with PPE, with in our care homes, the sheer pace, the staffing pressures, the sheer pace of working in every corner of health and social care, we lost so many of our opportunities to get back into the green, to have that coffee catch up with some peers, to have a debrief at the end of the day, to have opportunities to just sit and talk about what's going on. And over time, that really takes its toll on us. Interestingly, many teams and services I talk about actually find the early days of the pandemic, when everyone was fighting the same enemy, in retrospect, it was a little bit greener than we realized at the time. We were all pulling together, but for many of us, it was utterly terrifying early days of the pandemic. And what we've seen over time is lots of our staff and our services being up there in the red, absolutely burning out, cannot bear it anymore, exhaustion, and also it's just too much to bear, and this sort of hitting the blue and then ping-ponging between ever since. And this is very much a picture that we continue to see within the entire workforce and the whole system. So you can see that I'm sort of mixing there whether I'm talking about individuals or or teams, and as we sort of drift into this, it's really, really relevant for teams as well. People co-regulate. We bounce off each other. One person who is stressed, there's ripples, but normally the trigger for the strain and the stress isn't an individual person's trigger. It affects the team, it affects the service. There was a video produced by Ness. It was narrated by Jenny Young in 2019, and we'll share the link to that one afterwards. And it was applying that window of tolerance model that Dan Siegel developed for individuals to systems and organizations. And we'll share the link for that if you want to watch it afterwards. But this is a little sort of snapshot that we've taken from that. And the idea that our teams have this, when we're in the green, we have psychological safety. We've got that lovely, curious, collaborative, safe ability to explore, support each other, flex to strains and unexpected things that come up. And over time, that green window can become quite narrow. It can become a little sliver that we can find very elusive. And we can have the whole team or service up in this state of red, where there's that high power arised, high energy, high threat feeling, a real sense of fear, high complaints, high staff turnover, real rigidity in the system. And it's people in a state of high threat and short-term coping, protective coping. And obviously none of us can sustain that for very long. And as the yellow line suggests, we crash down to the blue, and we can end up seeing teams and services with this blue feeling to them, where there's that sort of lethargy, a sort of feeling of disengagement, a helplessness and a hopelessness that can be there. And as I'm describing that, I'm sure many of you are relating to in specific situations or teams where you can feel that sense of high threat, high energy, or that sense of heaviness, weariness, or the I sometimes think of it as the tumbleweed moments when in a meeting nobody speaks, nothing's coming forward. It's like trying to get blood from a stone if you're chairing it. That's a real classic sign of a blue team, a team that's in a state of blue at that point in time. This slide is lots and lots of words on it. It's taken directly from that Ness video, and when you get the slides afterwards, you'll be able to read that a little bit more. I think it's a really nice reference to sort of think about what many of these words are behaviours. Some describe how people or teams are feeling, but many of them are behaviours. And really helpful perspective to take when we're looking at trying to tap into how teams and people are feeling. So I think I'm just having a wee look at the chat. Have we missed anything? Yep, there's. Okay, I don't think there's any questions that we need to address just now.
No questions. People seem to be relating to it though, so.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, so for the next bit, I suppose that feels like quite a bit of, it's maybe not new to lots of you, but it feels like that I've talked quite a lot about some theory. It's quite a simple model, but I think it resonates so much, it can be quite a heavy load to take that information on. So we're just going to have a wee reflect for a few minutes and just give ourselves a chance to sort of catch up emotionally and with what might have been triggered in our own minds as we've been thinking about this stuff. So Phil, are you going to talk us through the first part? Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk through the first part. So for this exercise, I'm going to ask you to think about what triggers red in you in your work role. And I'm aware we've got quite a draft of different people and different roles in here, so it can be anything at all, anything that triggers that red feeling that Sue's been talking about. So for example, it could be that Friday afternoon, the late phone call to request an admission into the care home or a ward. It could be 5 o'clock where your boss sends you an email saying, where's that report you're supposed to send me at 9 o'clock this morning? Or it can just be difficult team dynamics where you're feeling a bit uncomfortable. So once you've got that scenario in mind, I want you to just notice what happens to your body and your mind You might start to feel uncomfortable. You might start to feel a bit agitated. You might start to notice your heart's beating a bit faster. You get a bit warmer. Or you might start to notice that your mind becomes hyper-focused on one thing. Your facial expression might change. The way you relate to other people might change. You might question, what's that person's motives? What is it they're asking of me? You might have a sense of fear, maybe injustice. You might be suspicious of the overall system around you. Or you might have 1,001 things running through your head at one time. You can't really pick one to choose to action. So being in the red zone, we've all experienced it. And actually it can be quite adaptive or helpful in the short term. And I'll give you an example. So a brain surgeon and his team are in theatre operating. Suddenly something goes wrong. It's all hands on deck. Everyone jumps into the red zone. They're problem solving, they're hyper focused, they're trained to do this. They get through that blip in the theatre. And then afterwards, they all come down again. So a red response can be helpful. However, if we're in the red for a sustained period of time, it really becomes detrimental to our own well-being and how we are able to approach our roles and work. And once you've been up in the red, you crash down.
And that takes us into the blue zone. It's often very difficult. I find it very difficult to actually connect with how I feel when I'm in the blue zone. And that's sort of the point of it. It's a protective response within ourselves that protects us from some of the horrors or the chronic strain that we are feeling. But if you just let yourself bring to mind what's maybe resonated with you from when we talked about blue, there might be a particular scenario or trigger or just a chronic theme within your working life that resonates with the sense of blue. It might lead you to feel a bit detached and numb. It can be really difficult to focus and hone in on it and catch your thoughts, put your finger on exactly what the specific is. And it can bring a real sense of lethargy, a lack of drive and motivation, and a real heavy sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And unfortunately, within our working lives, that can often bring a sense of shame as well, or a sense of guilt or fear about things that we maybe have turned away from, aren't quite up to date with, or we are avoiding. Looking around, if you just shift slightly from looking at yourself when you're feeling the blue, and you notice maybe how others around you who might also be blue, they might appear disinterested. They might appear that they're a bit checked out, not bringing their A game. But just in this moment of reflection, just noticing that actually there's probably a reason why they're in that blue state. It's protective. And for short periods of time, for all of us, that is incredibly helpful. I don't know how any of us would have got through the last few years in our working lives if we didn't go blue with things, put things in the blue box, turn away from them. But like all of this, if we stay in that state for too long and we don't get a chance and don't get the safety to return to green, it can lead to ripples and consequences that really bite us in the bum. It's ways to try and protect us. Things that happen naturally, we don't intend to do this. It happens to us. It's our way of coping. But over time, if we get stuck in that blue state of mind, some of those areas of blind spots, either emotionally for ourselves or within our work, can ripple and build up and really lead to many, many vicious cycles. And usually when that happens, it's the perfect recipe for us to ping straight back into the red and repeat that cycle again. Really important to just have that, some sort of understanding of that element of the human factors for ourselves and about our colleagues, knowing that when somebody is in the red and we see that and we recognize that, red meeting red is not a good way to deal with that. Increasing the threat, increasing the sense of injustice is not going to lead to anything constructive. And again, red meeting blue, focusing in on performance or behavior and so on, is not going to get us where we want to be. What we find is this model and this way of thinking about it just allows us to have that lens of compassion, to really tune into the people that we are and that we're working with. So we've had Phil, did you want to pop in?
No, I was just saying probably time for a short break.
Yep, absolutely. So we've had a wee bit of theory and a wee moment of reflection. So we'd really encourage you to stand up, have a stretch. If you want to have a comfort break, grab yourself a drink or something, and we'll just take 5 minutes and we'll be back just after 11:15. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had time for a quick comfort break, and passing over now to Phil, I think.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Sue, for the introduction. Okay, folks, so what I'm going to do is share some of my experiences and reflections working with the local care home sector over the pandemic, in the hope to bring some of the stuff that Sue spoke about to life and to help you maybe generalise it to your own systems that you work in. Like I said before, I know we've got a host of different health and social care workers in here and maybe more different professionals. And I'm hoping the stuff we're speaking about today is applicable to all the teams you work in. For a bit of context, I was working with the local care home liaison mental health team during the pandemic to support them in their role supporting care home residents with distress and dementia and complex mental health needs. I've tried to capture some of the variables that I've seen as key impacting the care home system. As we know, everything that we work in is a complex system, and this word complexity is used a lot. And I know there's probably people in the audience today working in care homes today saying, well, he's missed a whole bunch of these variables. But really, the reason I've done this at the time now is just to kind of capture some of the key ones that were impacting during the pandemic. Because ultimately, everything that happens around the care home is based on that care interaction between the resident, family, and the staff member. And I want to just think and pause a moment to talk about complexity, because it's something that's spoke about a lot in health and social care. And it actually it's a difficult job that we all do. And sometimes I don't think we stop to give ourselves a pat in the back for it. And I want to give you some examples here. So I'm using Stacey's matrix, and the X and Y axis down the bottom left quadrant, you'll see that this is a tool that can help complex decision making, and simple decisions are made down the bottom left when there's close agreement to certainty and outcome. However, this changed over the course of the pandemic in care homes. Let me give you an example. So, care home, taking up hand washing. We all had to take up hand washing across the UK. We could all agree during the pandemic that hand washing was a good thing to do. We knew the reason we were doing it, and we knew how to do it, and we knew what would happen. So the reason we're doing it is to stop germ spread. We knew the 20-second hand IPC procedure, and we were doing that after all our interactions. That's a kind of simple health and social care decision. However, when you think about somebody with mobility needs in the care home and a physiotherapy programme that requires them to get up and about and get out, that's manageable during normal times. Becomes a bit more difficult during COVID times when restrictions were in place about people's ability to access the home, the care home they lived in, the corridors, the gardens. So things that we dealt with pre-pandemic that were complicated started to verge into the realm of complexity. Then we had the ever-evolving guidance. So every Friday night, the government changing the guidance that the care home managers had to implement over the weekend. We had families trying to understand this. We had staff trying to provide complex care to people with some really serious health comorbidities in a care home setting, which is very different from a hospital setting because they don't have access to many things like having bloods checked and analysed quickly, access to scans. And I think we can forget just how complex the work is we do. And for us today, I want us to think about everything we do fits in this zone of complexity and sometimes borders into chaos. And I'll circle back to this in a while. Over the pandemic, we started to get increased referrals for care home residents. We started to get a lot of AP1 concerns getting raised via social work. We had a lot of families phoning us up in a complete state of distress, with care home managers really struggling to manage day to day. We had people we'd work with who are getting re-referred. We had increased medication requests. we were just inundated from all the care homes locally seeking help. And we didn't really know what was going on at first. And it was really difficult when we were working remotely. However, when myself and the nursing team were able to go out and meet people, what became very apparent is that people, the care home staff and the teams around residents were doing the best they could. But there was so much stress. You're talking about a year into the pandemic, something we thought might be short-lived was now stretching on. I mean, you're thinking back to that window of tolerance. People had been operating at such a high level of stress that the window shrunk. So people's tolerance to think creatively about any kind of problem day to day in providing care for residents, it really wasn't there. And to understand this, we tried to think, well, what's actually happening here across the system? The system had fallen into a hyper aroused state. Everyone was just trying to get through their day, trying to get to the end of the day to make sure that they feel they've done their job. And that is absolutely understandable because, like we mentioned before, the red is a protective state of being. However, over time, this red, it was sustained to the point that people were not functioning the way they would probably want to function in their job. And people are then pushing away their responsibilities and seeing, that's not my problem, that's your problem, can you please deal with it? And that was really helpful for us as a team, for a system locally to think about, we need to try and help people regulate back into the green zone to think creatively about the problems we've been talking about. Ideally, in health and social care, we want to be open to each other and say, right, this is my role, I've got these skills, what's your role? Let's come together and provide the best care we can for the people we're looking after. So we now know from multiple reviews, meta-analysis and individual qualitative reports that actually what we were seeing in that red triangle, I mean, no wonder we were seeing it. People were really, really unwell due to the stress they were experiencing. Family members, residents, carers, health and social care workers. It had its toll on well-being and mental health, and we now have evidence of that as well. Locally, at that time, when we realised that these systems are all over the place in terms of not being able to speak or respond to each other in the way they want, they're in the red, we developed a care home staff wellbeing group. Now, this was a multi-stakeholder group with representatives from Scottish Care, the local care home system, so care home managers and staff, representatives from the North and South Health and Social Care Partnerships, NHS Lanarkshire representation in the form of communications, nursing and psychology. And the idea about coming together at first was to think about, let's have our ears to the ground to hear what the care home staff are saying they need. Let's listen to their wellbeing needs. And it was also to provide a safe space, create a space with psychological safety that we all as stakeholders could come to and share what we've been experiencing in the previous week. And as this group progressed, there was a real sense of psychological safety within it. So it created a green system where we knew once a week we were going to get together, and no matter what we'd experienced, we could talk about it in a safe manner. And people would come in the red, and over the first 30 minutes, if it took that just one person just having a chat with us all as a group to come back down into the green, that was fine. That was a well spent 30 minutes, because you want to get people out of the red, up out of the blue to think creatively. And that's what we did. In the hope that being in the green zone, thinking creatively, responding to what we heard the care home staff's needs were, we would then have a ripple effect through the system. And I won't spend too long talking about the outcomes from this. I think this slide has come up at one time, but so down the bottom left, in the initial stages of the pandemic, what we heard care home staff telling us was, we feel abandoned. And why they felt abandoned was there was a whole focus on NHS and health staff in terms of the wellbeing supports that were available. And the local care home staff are saying to us, we don't feel we've got the access to this. We've got third sector staff. They just didn't feel that they were getting listened to. And so the first thing we done was create a pocket-sized or a wallet-sized card with a local helpline number that people could phone at any point for any kind of wellbeing needs or mental health needs, and we could then listen to that and direct them on. So if you think about that, that's a red need. They were saying, we feel threatened, we feel abandoned, help us. And we tried to fill that need with this. We've then got this lovely picture of a resident playing the piano. Across the pandemic, I think care homes get an absolutely terrible negative press across national media outlets. It was really having an impact on the staff when I was speaking to them. The care home wellbeing group were hearing this as well. And so what we decided to do was try to create some kickback to that, some positive stories that we knew they were still happening in care homes. Care homes are a great place to work. There's always something going on. I love visiting them, particularly in the afternoon, because you never know what kind of activity is going to be there. That didn't stop. Staff in the care homes tried to keep that going. And this lady took on a 100-day piano challenge. And that reached approximately 22 million people on Facebook. But more importantly, it created positivity and hope for the local care home systems to know that care home residents were still, under all these kind of restrictions and everything that was going on, able to do what they've always done. And I think if you think about that negativity from the press was pushing people into the blue. The care home staff are feeling like no matter what we do, we're burnt out. We can't please everyone. And so this was a way to raise people back into the green. And then over time, the red and blue became a bit mixed because we didn't realise how long the pandemic was going to last. And I'm sure we've all felt that as well. We didn't really know how to target it. So what we've done was develop leaflets based on themes we were picking up, directly tailored to care home staff. So stuff about I'm having difficulty sleeping because I've been on 4 shifts, doing night shifts, and I've done extra hours. So sleep hygiene, general wellbeing tips, but stuff about mental health problems like PTSD and anxiety. And that was helpful. So I've kind of summarised there was at the start of the pandemic, everyone jumped into the red zone. We were all thinking, how are we going to deal with this? This is really important. Let's get our heads together. We tried to evolve. We tried to adapt to rules. Actually, this is going to last a long time. This is getting really tough. We're really starting to feel the strain of it. That's where our care home staff wellbeing group came in. We took it as far as we could, but found that actually the conditions and the context had changed from when we initially set out. And that's really where Sue's local work with the staff wellbeing service is taking this one step further. And I just circle back to the complexity involved here is that if you're in a complex situation, just ask yourself, where would you like to be in your window of tolerance if you had to make a decision? And I'll pass over to you now, Sue.
Thanks, Phil. So I think we hit a bit of a transition point within Lanarkshire when we were trying to sort of think, as Phil's sort of in the slide that's up at the moment, that is what we're doing still the right fit for our staff, and it really pushed us to think about why did it work, and why was it helpful at the time, and I think having a lot of the regular attenders, with lots of managers and carers that came along to the group, but a lot of the sort of consistent regular attenders at those meetings were people who were in supportive roles. And I think having those that were going out in supportive roles to different care homes, ensuring that they are getting a chance to return to the green so that they can then take that to the care homes, and it rippled, as Phil said. But times changed, and I suppose the diversity of the challenges that were there was just increasing and increasing over time. So we've thought really hard about how do we capture this, and how do we let this keep evolving? And I suppose that's where we've honed in on the window of tolerance as a really lovely way to guide us. But in terms of when we're trying to start, if you're here today and you want to try and take some of our learning and the way we've been working to your team, or you're in a supportive role, and when you embark on a new sort of system, how do we go about it? Where do we start? I suppose that's the bit that we wanted to cover just briefly now. If we go back to thinking about our natural human response to psychological trauma, and we think about that example I gave before of a bump in the car, what we need as our human instinct need to try and get back in the green after anything happens is connection with other people. So phase 1 of this model that we use is reconnecting. And it's trying to re-establish those conditions within our working lives where staff have a sense of safety within their relationships and their connections within their immediate colleagues. And if it is a sort of not a day-to-day team, but a multidisciplinary team that maybe work together for particular cases or particular work streams, having that sense of connection and togetherness. And it's just so important that this is not forced, and there's no script for this. It has to come from within the team, giving people the opportunity and the chance, but also an explanation that this is part of a long game. This isn't going to, an away day or a team lunch isn't going to fix things, but it's the first step in a journey of recovery and trying to get ourselves into the green. And that I think we've seen so many creative ways that people do that. Sometimes it is just having 10-minute check-ins at the start and end of shifts. It's having opportunities where people can, within the environment, opportunities for them to come together now that our distancing isn't controlled as it was. But there's been so much creativity about how teams do this, whether it's charity events that they're organising, fundraising activities. One that I loved was teams that were going to do a rage room where they could get the rage out first, and then do an escape room where they came together as a team to escape afterwards. Creativity, letting the team own it, is so important. So reconnecting is phase one. Give them a chance for natural recovery and sharing what's happened. Phase two then is very much steadying the ship. And we use the window of tolerance model. We share that video. We sometimes do also share the other link that we'd given, the NEST video as well. Giving staff a shared language, enough education to have that shared language, and the validation of this explains what's happened to you, what's happens to you, how it feels. But letting the team then, with that connection and togetherness, work on identifying what are the traps, the individual, but probably more importantly, often the collective traps. What are the triggers for us as a team hitting the red? What are the protective things that we end up doing? And are they serving us well? Is it like that brain surgery example Phil gave, when we don't want to turn down that red response? It's necessary for safety. Or are we getting stuck in a state of high threat where we're actually not able to be creative and to collaborate with each other, our patients, our residents, our families, and multi-agency staff that we're working with? Because that's what happens when we're stuck in the red. And the same for the blue. So this is really tailored to each staff group. Some teams, I'm going in as a psychologist to facilitate that work, and it is really challenging. Other teams and services, I think just watching the video, getting the shared language themselves, this is natural human stuff. People can do a lot to figure it out as a team invested in trying to improve things for themselves. And only when we've done that phase 1 and 2, and we've basically got the connection, we've got broken some of the red and blue traps and prevented some of the ripples, only then is that team ready to do traditional service development, service improvement type work from a green perspective. The number of managers, seasoned, experienced managers, that tell me, I don't know why it's not working anymore. I used to put on a development day and everyone was engaged and contributing, and there were ideas flowing, and it's tumbleweed. It's just not working. I don't know what to do. I feel de-skilled because I don't know. And I believe that's because we're using sort of old green strategies when we assume that our staff are okay, and actually they're stuck in the red and the blue, and they're not able to engage with thinking to the future, coming up with creative ideas. But once you get phase 1 and 2 complete, so often phase 3, just the team looks after themselves. They bring that energy, the creativity, the ideas that come from the ground, safety increasing over time, and it's wonderful to see that recovery, because that's what this is. It's recovery from what we've been through. So I think we wanted to just revisit a little moment of when we're in the red. What does that sort of, what do we need when we're in the red? I suppose that's one thing that we thought you might be wondering as you leave today, is thinking, so what do we do when somebody's in the red? We've talked about the being and the feeling stuff, but what does it look and feel like, and what nurse do we do with it? So I think for red, there's usually a real palpable sense. Once you know this model and once you apply it to staff and teams and systems, you start to recognize it very, very readily. And you can feel often an energy and urgency. You can often feel guards being up, and you can feel the threat. But also, if you're either a team that you're part of or a team that you're visiting, it can feel quite a threatening place to walk into when the team is in the red. It can feel like, suggestions are dismissed. There's a real sense of you don't understand. No, we've already tried that. There can be a prickliness and so on if you go in to try and problem solve when they're in the red. I suppose typical triggers for this are often, in care home settings, it's often when there's concern and threat about being able to care for a resident, feeling there's been an increase in falls, there's an adult support and protection concern, there's a high level of distressed behaviour in someone with dementia, there's complaints from family, or there's difficulty accessing wider support from a multidisciplinary team. These are very common sort of triggers for staff feeling in the red. But if we go back to that trauma model, what staff need, what individual people need when they're in the red, is they need safety. And there's different components to that. They need physical safety. And often when there's distressed behaviour and so on, there is a fear of injury. During the pandemic, of course, we all had fears about physical safety, especially when there was an outbreak. But we also have a need for professional safety. And that's one of the reasons that often, when a care plan is tricky to deliver on, or we don't feel we've quite got the right care plan, we've tried everything that we know within our skill set, and somebody's still distressed, they're still lashing out during personal care assistance, they're not taking their medication, they're not engaging with the support we're trying to give them. Or we're just so run off our feet and so busy that it's really difficult to keep up with some of the tasks that we need to do for our professional safety. And we've also got that sense of moral safety. There is a need for us to feel emotionally safe and morally safe and understand what's happening to us. There's different elements of that, but when a team or an individual's in the red, safety is their underlying need. I see one hand up. Is that Kerry?
Kerry, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Or maybe just pop it in the chat box and we'll come back to it in the Q&A if you're struggling to get off mute.
I think that's you off mute, Kerry, if you want to jump in.
No, I think you're struggling to get off mute, so we'll come back to
Pop it in the chat, Kerry, and we'll pick it up from there. Okay, so that was just a little bit about red, a little bit more about red, and I suppose just in the same sort of ilk, for when we're in the blue, I think for us, when we've been working with this model for quite a long time, really the underlying need when you get that sense of blue is hope is needed. It's that sense of burnout, sense of hopelessness and helplessness that really perpetuates that. And I think supporting individuals and staff to feel heard, to feel like they matter, to feel like they're making a difference, that there's a shared purpose, there's a vision of what their role's all about, and they are making a difference even on the toughest days, is often the antidote to blue. What's really, really important, I think, is that we link this model to a lot of the stuff we'll be hearing from many corners of our working lives around psychological safety within teams, having the safety to speak up, to admit mistakes, to ask for help without fears of reprimand, and feeling able to raise things like that. But also really important is compassionate leadership. And that is not just from the bosses in terms of leaders, that's from every corner of the workforce. We are all leaders in one way or another. And having, I suppose, that fundamental aspect of compassion is that sensitivity to distress and the motivation to do something about it. So noticing, empathizing, trying to understand what's going on and responding in some way is just so important. That's really daunting, and I think the way that we all have to get through this is to have the courage to look at the human stuff that's there before we jump into trying to do the practical stuff. That is the biggest challenge for us all, and none of us can do that alone. It is about doing that together, knowing yourself, knowing each other, and finding your tribe that can support you and keep you in the green, so that you can find the strength to actually lean into this human stuff, because it's heavy and it's sore and it's really difficult and it can be really exhausting. But as a whole system, I think we've been so focused on the doing throughout the pandemic and not tuning into enough of this stuff that we're actually, it's a little bit like the excess disability that many of you will probably be familiar with. I think there's a lot of excess stress and strain on staff at the moment because we're putting a lot of energy into dealing with the red and blue traps that are rippled around, vicious cycles going round and round many times, rather than actually trying to get ourselves back into the green and then putting our energy into trying to boost the green. I think it relates in my mind quite nicely to that sense of excess disability. I think we've got some excess staff wellbeing concerns that we could hone in on a little bit more directly, and really important to think about what the blocks are to doing this and going there. So what nurtures green? Green's where we want to be. What nurtures green? Really interestingly, when I work with staff in groups and I ask them to describe a situation when they felt a real sense of green, nearly every single time, the example that comes up was one of those worst days in my career. It's really interesting how that happens. So often people describe when something awful happened and actually they got through it and they felt okay because their team rallied around them. There was togetherness. There was a real focus on how they are, what everyone's doing. There was sharing, there was supporting. But overall, we've put some words on the slide there. These are the things that we feel really promote that sense of green, and having that playfulness, that joy at work, having space for humour, that human stuff is just so, so important. So I wonder, will we stop just here for
we have some questions coming in.
Mm-hmm. So I think we'll stop just here for questions, and then we've got a couple more slides to do. Is that okay, Michelle?
That's great. So thanks very much. There's a couple of questions starting to come in. So the first one is from Debbie, who's asked both of you, how do we change a culture where a team is either in the red or blue zone that's been embedded within a care home for a long time, and where one has tried to look at various methods to change things, and it can be very frustrating and demoralising. And Christine's actually agreed that she's in the same situation. How do you educate if the culture is so deeply one-way focused?
Yeah. It is so difficult. It is so, so difficult. I personally find it's very hard for somebody within that system to facilitate that journey of change. I do think having somebody external that can help as a sounding board that seems to be quite a key ingredient for some of the trickier stuck teams that we've worked with. And I think it's going back to that the 3 phases model, that if we try to impose change, we're trying to ask people to stop using their protective coping. And if we're jumping to that part and trying to see the results and see the end product, it can actually make it worse. So the sort of model of the connection, and then the trying to understand what are the red and blue traps. People don't want to be prickly. They don't want to be hostile within their working lives. It's nobody's default way of being. It happens for a reason. but we need to somehow get the safety to understand what is the threat, why are they feeling like that, and how do we go about changing that? So it sounds, I think, if you've got a specific team in your mind, it's possibly sounding pie in the sky and how to do that. But that's the sort of approach that we take, and we just find if you jump for phase 3 or you try to go in and push to understand phase 2 before you've got phase 1 in place and a sort of sense of team connection, togetherness, and a wee bit of safety, it just doesn't work.
I think it's really difficult. I think yeah. So Debbie, I've worked with a couple of care homes locally with this type of situation. I think what Sue said, having someone external to your team to come in to try and move towards phase 1 can be helpful. I had an experience where I went in as an external person to a care home after the care home manager had requested some help because they'd noticed certain people in the team were stuck in red and blue, and we were able to have a session where it was an open talking session where they're able to tell me and vent really how they were feeling and come out of the red zone back up into the green zone from blue. And it reportedly was quite helpful. And I guess this is tricky thing with all of this stuff is that a lot of you are probably sitting there in teams where you say, it's all very fine and well, how do we do this? I think the human factors are the real key thing here, is that we fall into tell us what to do, give me some sort of thing to do. And what we're actually saying is we need to sit with the human feelings that we have here. Why are people stuck here? Can we address that? Can we develop some sort of language within the teams you work in to talk about that and to call it out? I've worked in plenty of teams, situations where you walk into the place and you know straight away it's going to be a bad shift because there's a sense of everyone's up here and everyone goes through with the shift the whole day, 24 hours. 3 different shifts will come in and people just maintain that because it bumps on. If you can find ways of creating some sort of pocket of green throughout the day and invite people to use that to try and break these cycles, that can be also helpful. So, is there anything else?
Yeah, I think I'm just reading the comment after that, I think from Fiona, about the financial resources, the staffing and so on, and you're absolutely right. I couldn't disagree with any part of that. I think it's the combined, having what we find often is that the team in this or the service is maybe not able to articulate very clearly what the practical problems are, because everything becomes blurred. There might be hostility, defensiveness in the narrative, but it can be very difficult to actually put your finger sometimes on what's needed, and you bringing in this sort of lens alongside it can make such a difference. I think within some services that I've worked, I think it's often been a bit of blueness and a bit of disengagement with some aspects of it, and high energy and very, very strong narrative about others, like just we need more staff. There's nothing else is going to make a difference until we get more staff, and that's part of it. But we are all in that situation at the moment, and we do need to continue to deliver a service and try our best to look after our staff and our residents or our patients with the staffing that we have, or the staffing we can access at that point in time. And it's trying to navigate through that in a way that lets us all capture what's there, and validate for staff how they're feeling, and having really clear communication within the team and when we're escalating risks and so on. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, Fiona, when you put your comment in.
And there's another comment there for a question from Maureen Cosser, who works in the Care Inspectorate. And Maureen's saying, through the pandemic, there were some real examples of power shift, which led to people not feeling valued. And in many instances, this new power position remains. Did you find this, and what have you done to build relationships and acceptance around this? And there's another one from Maureen after that, but I'll let you answer that one first. And I suppose that's to either of you there.
Yeah, I'm interested to which particular power shifts you're referring to, Maureen. But yeah, there was power shifts, and over the pandemic, what happened was we had a hierarchical country. Stuff was coming from government. Stuff went to the NHS. Stuff went into pyramids in NHS and came down, and that was a protective thing because during times of crisis, people actually can benefit from hierarchical structures or command and control structures. Tell us what to do. We're panicked here. However, I think good health and social care comes from being able to flatten the hierarchy and being able to have open conversations across different levels. And there is power imbalances, and it's about what people value and care. And this is something that was there before the pandemic as well. Is my main discussion I have with people across all sectors at the minute is staff are the most important asset we all have within the teams. We need to value them first and foremost above everything else. And that's a difficult conversation to have with some people because in the background you've got targets and finance and budgets and all that sort of stuff. But if you can have that open conversation to help people understand that staff are the biggest asset we have in the NHS and in social care moving forward, and to keep them valued and happy in work, we need to touch in. We need to connect with the human emotions and what they're experiencing. And to do that, come back to Debbie's question, is how do we create some sort of language or space within teams to bring this stuff out? And it can feel a bit uncomfortable, but I'm sure if people go away today and have a think, there might be ways to do it. And I'll give you an example. So with the Care Home Liaison Mental Health team, we spoke about this window of tolerance and really struggling through the pandemic, but we adopted this so that when people were having a bad day, they just came into the office and shouted their colour out, and then people would respond. And it became a bit of a jokey way, but actually it helped people regulate back to the green system so we could go out and do another visit. And it sounds ridiculous, but that simple thing was something that helped at the time, and we still continue to do it when we speak to each other. So you can be creative. There's no right or wrong way to do this, and there's no template of do this and this will happen. We're humans, really, is the main kind of message from today. And Maureen, that's what I'm kind of saying. Power shifts. We just need to have open conversations. Call it out. Be non-threatening. Just call out what you're seeing and just reflect back to why you're worried about it, if you can.
I'm wondering if part of what you're referring to, Maureen, as well, is that sort of the impact of the command control system, and a lot of I know a lot of the care homes that we worked with that had put so much effort into homely environments over the years, and suddenly with all the IPC guidance and scrutiny that came on that, it felt like homes became much more clinical environments. Things like that tension between command and control and the autonomy. And that is, I think, has been one of the biggest challenges and the biggest blocks we've had as a workforce in our recovery, is that one minute we're getting the command control stripped of autonomy message about a huge aspect of our working lives. And the next moment, there's this sense of, you have to step it up, and pressure for autonomous working. And when staff it's almost forcing us into this red and blue and then trying to drag us out of it again. If we're experiencing command and control, the healthiest place to be is in the blue, slightly disengaged from that, and not having your sense of autonomy to make your own decisions as a manager, as a leader, as a staff member. So then we're suddenly almost shamed for being in the blue and not stepping up and having to controls given back, and we're expected to sort of jump to it and perform again. It's a process within the system that I think has been really, really clumsy and clunky for many of us, and that continues at the moment. The second part of your question there, Maureen, I think it is really related to this. So many of the triggers and the traps around teams and services being in the red and blue are not within their gift to change. And when the staff support psychology service are getting involved with teams and services to give recovery support now, we won't do it with individual teams. We will. It just doesn't work, but it also doesn't feel ethical to really help staff understand when they're in the red and the blue, if we don't have any scope to actually influence that and take the whole system on a journey. So we really try to work with the wider system, get everyone involved so that we've got that buy-in from senior leaders from the different agencies or stakeholders involved, and all together go on a journey that is going to be a long game. It's going to take time for this, but we need to start there's some changes staff, individuals and teams can make, but I get very, very riled at the self-care narrative being used, that people need to take responsibility for themselves, look after themselves and so on. They are. And that's why they're ending up in the red and the blue, because that's how they're protecting themselves. And there's no way somebody in the red is going to go and read a website or, access some of these self-care supports. It has to be a whole system approach to this to try to move in a direction towards recovery.
Just aware of time, Sue, and there's still some questions coming through. Suzanne, working remotely and hybrid, I would say the first step of Sue's model is reconnecting. Try to reconnect at any point in the week you can. But if you've questions, we are happy to accept these after the event, Sue. We'll try and respond.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll respond to the other questions that are coming in now. Absolutely. Going back to the slides for a wee moment, we did want to have a call to action. And just from the discussions today, see if there's anything that you would take away from today that might create a little bit of green for you, your team, or some of the systems that you're working in. So we did just wanted to prompt you to have a wee ponder about that. And if you want to share any ideas, please pop them in the chat box, and others can see what you're thinking. We'll just let you do that in your own time, because we're up against it now. We've got 5 minutes left, and we're now going to just revisit that poll that we did earlier on. Again, for anyone that wasn't here at the very start when we did a poll, it's not, this bit isn't going in the chat function, it's going in the poll that's going to pop up on your screen. Oops, there we go, that should be it. So again, just one word to describe how you're feeling at the end of the webinar today. One of the reasons why we do these polls is transitions within our days are so important to try and give us a chance of being in the green, transitioning between the different tasks we have to do, the different modes we have to be in throughout our working lives is really difficult. And if we go back to that, the car accident example, we're storytellers. That's how we make sense of things. I like to think of it as trying to put chapters into our story of the day, trying to put chapters in to have separation between the different areas. Really, really important for us as people to just keep up with ourselves as we go through our busy days. But just as these are coming in, emboldened. I love that word.
Yes.
Whoever said that. It's lovely to see that tired was the biggest one last time, but it's lovely to see that inspired is the biggest one now.
Yeah, so at the start we had a couple of groupings of frazzled, stressed, overwhelmed, very much red words. We also had bored, I think, but not sure what today's going to hold. And now I'm seeing to a bit more of a green words.
Yeah.
Hopeful, inspired, thoughtful. That's the place we want people to be. Somebody's put green.
I know, so it was a bit ambitious, but I hope that 130 of you might have a shift. But I think having that sense of togetherness and validation that comes with this model, I'm really pleased to see the words that are coming through there, and just really hope that you take something from today with just a bit of food for thought and hopefulness that we can get there. We will get there, wherever there is, but we'll keep going.
Thank you so much to Sue and Phil. That was fantastic, and I've got a whole list of resources that I'm going to take away from today. I loved the theory and the practice and the real practical tips that you've given us all today. So thank you so much for that. I'll definitely be finding my tribe to keep me in the green zone and taking away some of those tips as well. I loved your talk around compassionate leadership and the lovely examples that were shared around that today. So thank you so much to Phil and to Sue for giving up your time. I know that that probably there are times in your day-to-day when you might be in the red zone. So I hope this has been a green part of it for you. And we're so grateful for you doing this. We would just ask everyone in the last few minutes to have a look at the poll and see the outcome of the shift from this morning, and to fill out the evaluation in the last few minutes. We always want to learn from any webinars that we have. I'd also like to thank all the organising team for all the work that they've done behind the scenes, and a particular shout out to Marina, who's set all of this up for us, and all of our technical issues that she's been able to overcome in the run up to it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we will be in touch shortly with the link to the recording and the slide set and resources that were shared today. Thank you.